Being awakened by a ringing telephone in the middle of the night, only to hear the voice of a stranger telling you that you need to get to the hospital emergency room because your child was involved in a terrible car crash, is every parent's nightmare. That nightmare continues as you get to the hospital, only to have the doctors tell you they did everything they could to help your child, but the injuries were so severe, there was nothing they could do for him. This is the nightmare the Blosser family lived on Sunday, July 15, 2007, when their son Christopher and his friend were killed in a tragic car crash that also injured their friend Isaiah Irons. Saturday, July 14, 2007, was a good day for Christopher. He spent the day at Grand Lake St. Mary's with his father, cousin, and a friend.
It was really choppy that day, so we were lucky she wasn't there because she wouldn't even let us go because we were beating the boat up pretty bad. But the boys, they were having a blast.
When they came back here then, and the first thing when they came in was, oh, can we have some friends over for the pool because we have a pool in the backyard? Can we have a party?
Later that evening, Christopher left home to spend the night at a friend's house. He never came home.
First they wanted to know could they all spend the night here, and we all said no because Mike was leaving for Japan in the morning. So we said no sleepovers. We're going to church. We're gonna take him to the airport in the morning. We don't need any more kids here. So about 5 minutes later, comes back in and he's like, oh, Brittany's mom's out there. Please, please, please. Cody's mom says we can stay at her house. Here, she's on the phone. Do you want to ask her? We didn't think much of it. We knew Cody had a pond, and we figured the reason we let him go was we thought, oh, those boys are so tired. They've tubed, they've swam, they've run the neighborhood.
They talked about how tired they were when I was bringing them home from the lake.
So we thought, oh, they're going to get over there. They're going to probably swim in the pond for a little bit, and they're going to be out because they'd been out all day just so active that we didn't think twice about them, didn't even worry about what they were going to do next.
We had all planned on hanging out that night. We didn't know when or what or when. We thought maybe it was going to be at his house or maybe it was going to be at Chris's house, but we all planned on hanging out that night because we hadn't seen each other in a while. And at first we were drinking some beer, and I had about 5 or 6 of those. And on top of that, when you smoke weed and you drink and you're drunk and you're high, it's just different. First ride was when Cody and I decided that we wanted to go out and we wanted to cruise a little bit. So we cruised on Agadir, and Agadir's got those really sharp curves, so it kind of, seemed, for us, it was a little NASCAR, so we was like, all right, cool. And still in my mind, there was just that thought, and it was just telling me that this isn't a good idea. Chris was just in the room, and he was watching TV, and by the time we got back, we all just sat in the garage a little bit, and we just started smoking a cigarette again. And then that's when we decided to get into the car, and we started driving. And to be honest, I don't know where we went at that time. It was just because I wasn't in my right mind, and I don't know how far we went. All I just remember is that the railroad tracks.
Around 3:30 Sunday morning, Christopher and his friends got in the friend's parents' car and headed out for a ride. They didn't get far. Just around the corner on Wapak Road is a railroad crossing called the Flying Tracks. Teens know that they can make their car go airborne if they hit the tracks fast enough. And that's what happened.
We were going fast at that time because everything was racing in my head. And then once we hit the railroad tracks, everything just slowed down. And I just started looking around a little bit. I could hear my own breathing, and I could just kind of see something just flash at me. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if maybe it was my life or whatever it was. But it really got to me, and it just slowed everything down. And I don't remember being in the air. All I remember is just my mind. My whole body just flipped, and it just went inside of my mind. And I just started thinking about a lot of things. And then it slowly started to speed up again. And then by the time it sped up, that's when we hit the tree. And that's when the horn was what snapped me back into reality.
The driver was slumped over the steering wheel. His head was lodged in between the windshield and the dashboard. His right arm had extended out and was on the dash and was partly covered in blood and missing some of the skin. And he did not appear to be conscious, moving, or breathing to me.
It was probably one of the more graphic scenes I've seen in a long time. We quickly started patient care.
Chris was brought in by emergency services. He was involved in a fairly horrible car accident with a lot of trauma, a great deal of difficulty getting him out of the vehicle. The vehicle was so deformed, he was trapped inside. His breathing was not good. He had to be placed on a ventilator. in the field, done emergently. He had such severe facial injuries that the normal way that we would put somebody on a ventilator with a tube through the mouth into the windpipe could not be done. He actually had an emergency procedure where a hole was cut in the front of the windpipe and a tube directly placed there. So he was in bad shape when he came in.
We always keep the phone in our bedroom turned on just because Mike gets a lot of calls from work in the middle of the night. So when the phone rang, it usually doesn't alarm me when a phone rings in the middle of the night in the past because it was typically for him. And the person on the phone identified herself as someone living on Walpock Road and said to me, "Are you Chris Blosser's mom?" And I said, "Yeah." And the first thing that went through my mind was, oh my gosh, those kids have set those fireworks off and they've caught someone's field on fire. I mean, that was the first thing that hit my mind. And then she goes on to say, your son's been in an accident and they're taking him to St. Rita's and you need to get there now. And so I hung up the phone, woke Mike up and told him, and you know, still didn't think it was really that serious.
Yeah.
I mean, that never really hit my mind. I remember looking at Mike saying, oh, I hope he wore a seatbelt, because every time he would get in the car with me, I'd have to remind him to put his seatbelt on. So other than that, that was really my biggest concern was, oh my gosh, I hope he had a seatbelt on.
Yeah, I was pretty nervous because she didn't say, don't worry, he's all right. I mean, she just said, you need to get there now. So I was pretty nervous at that point.
I was sleeping and something woke me up, and my parents came in and were like, we're going to the hospital, your brother's in a car accident, but they didn't let me go with him. And my cousin was staying here. He lives in North Carolina, and they didn't wake him up either. He was staying in my brother's room, and I just kind of like didn't really think much of it.
And we were standing outside waiting for that ambulance, and none of the rescue personnel on it would tell us who was in there or anything like that.
They didn't know.
They weren't sure, and immediately security came out and took us inside because they didn't want us to see.
Chris had horrible facial trauma. His face was broken, bleeding, bruised, very deformed. He had not been wearing a seatbelt. This impact looked like it occurred at a fairly high rate of speed, and he no doubt bounced around the car to some extent. He hit the dashboard, the windshield, other parts of the car with his head, as tends to occur in unbelted high-speed injuries of this type. And his face was horribly deformed. He had a number of other injuries, a number of broken bones, and just tremendously bad trauma right at the scene. So yeah, it's easy to see how his parents could look at him and not know this was their son.
They finally came out about, 7:30?
Something like that.
And told us, they said that they would only let Mike and I back there. And by that time, my parents were there, Mike's parents were there, our daughter was there with her boyfriend at the time. And they told us to come back. And the nurse, the first thing she said to me was, she said, you need to hurry, he's gonna code. And that was the first time we'd seen him. So that was really, really hard.
I didn't actually know how bad it was until we were taken up to ICU, and I actually was like in the room, and I couldn't stay in the room for very long. It just didn't look like him at all. Like, there's blood everywhere, and it was swollen, and like he was all covered up and bandaged and bloody, and I just like didn't really hit me.
Chris had injuries pretty much from the top of his head all the way down to the bottom of his feet. And we had him swathed in about as many bandages as you could swathe him in. And then we were wrapping him in sheets because he was bleeding through the bandages so quickly.
I remember saying to the doctor, well, if he's going to die, you have to let him live on as someone else. So then immediately all these other people were in his room and they were giving him more medicine to keep his heartbeat going.
These parents were deeply in the worst tragedy a parent can go through, and their overwhelming thrust was, if Chris can't live, they want part of him to help others live. And that's when they made the decision to proceed with organ transplant.
That's what's helped me get through it, I think. The whole organ donation thing.
It's a tough decision at the time, though. But it's just because he's there, and you kind of want him to be in peace, and they had to fight so hard to keep him alive for like 3 hours till they got the surgeon there, and then we had to go and answer a bunch of questions on his life, you feel like your insides have been just ripped out of you, and it's like you don't want to go through anything else. You don't want him to go through anything else. So that time that they're when you make that decision, when they do it is tough.
Essentially what we needed to do was try and stabilize him to the point where a surgeon could come from our transplant center at Ohio State and get what organs could be used. In this case, because of the severe damage done to the heart and the lungs and other major organs, essentially we were looking at his liver and kidneys, which were desperately needed for others on the transplant list.
When the transplant team came in to take his organs, they had to unhook all these machines from him, and not be medical, I didn't know what any of that meant, but I remember the nurse looking at my brother and saying, "Is she going to be okay with us doing CPR?" Because I all of a sudden I saw the bag there, and I thought, okay, they've unplugged everything, so now that's why his heart's not beating, because they had to do CPR. Well, my brother told me later that his heart stopped beating right when I told him goodbye, and then it was okay for him to go. So for me, that was. You know, I think you always question, gosh, can they, when actually do they not know? And you know, it's like kind of like people with strokes and things. But so we really knew that his heart really did stop beating when we said it was okay for him to go. And I told him, I remember saying to him, "It's okay, go live with Grandpa. He's waiting for you," because he was real close to my dad. And his heart stopped beating, and they had to do CPR all the way to the surgery room.
Chris actually went into cardiac arrest on 2 different occasions, one earlier in the afternoon, which we were able to salvage, and the second literally as we were wheeling him down to the operating room for surgery. We literally were doing CPR on him as we wheeled him into the operating room. The surgeon rapidly prepared him and opened him up and got out the kidneys and the liver very quickly in a fashion that they were actually able to be used in 3 different recipients, all of which are alive now and doing well because this family had the presence of mind to think of trying to salvage something from this horrible tragedy.
Hundreds of Christopher's friends turned out to say goodbye to him.
In Christopher's case, Christopher was extremely well known, so it was extremely difficult in trying to find what kind of venue we were going to look at, whether we were looking at is the funeral home big enough to handle the funeral.
I delivered 2 speeches for the both of them, and I stood up there in front of a lot of people, and for some reason I put some smiles on some people's faces. I was just telling them stories about when Chris and I would hang out and what we did, and everybody wanted to hear about the good times. They didn't want to hear about the bad times, because obviously they were there for a bad reason, so why be there much longer for an even worse reason?
What is life like for the Blosser family and their friends now that Christopher is gone?
That first day of school, we were walking in the hallways, it's like, not seeing Chris or Cody there, it's like,
definitely something missing.
It hits you in the heart.
I just remember all the houseboat trips we had. Our parents are really good friends, and we used to go on the houseboats together. Like, we used to go on a houseboat vacation every year, and Christopher was always like, we'd always try and scare Christopher. Like, I remember Mike one day scaring him with like we were on the houseboat and he slammed the window right behind him and it jumped.
Bigfoot,
yeah, the Bigfoot scare. That was pretty cool. That was pretty funny. It was always Erica and Christopher, Mike, Jackie, Christopher, and Erica, but I don't know, not there anymore.
Losing a child is the worst thing a family can experience, especially when they know that Christopher and his friends' deaths didn't have to happen. Each decision they made contributed to the fatal crash. Christopher's friends should not have been drinking alcohol. Though Christopher had not been drinking, he should not have gotten into a car with an intoxicated driver. They should not have gone out past curfew. None of the boys had driver's licenses, and they should never have been behind the wheel of a car. They should have slowed down for the railroad tracks, and they should have been wearing their seatbelts. Isaiah did, and survived the wreck. It's the little decisions we make every day that affect our lives and the lives of everyone around us.
This can happen to you. This is a result of, being impulsive, not thinking about what you're doing, and making one mistake.